All right, let's do this. The copper box. In the autumn of 1901, workers demolishing a crumbling building in Detroit, Michigan, found something mortared inside the foundation wall. A sealed copper box, deliberate and precise, placed there by someone who expected it to be found. On the lid, no name, no date. Just a single instruction scratched into the metal. Open only when the world has forgotten what we tried to warn them about. Cornerstone capsules were a documented practice in the 19th century, particularly among Masonic builders and civic organizations who believed in leaving records for future generations. They used copper deliberately, understanding empirically what modern chemistry confirms, that copper resists corrosion across centuries. Whoever sealed this box wasn't being sentimental. They were engineering a message to survive. Inside were newspapers from 1878, a list of 41 names with addresses, a daguerreotype photograph of 7 unidentified men wearing identical lapel pins, and a folded letter in cipher. The symbol on those pins does not correspond to any known fraternal organization cataloged before 1900. The cipher has never been publicly decoded. The box passed through 3 private collections before vanishing from auction records in 1987. Historical records show that near-identical copper boxes with matching cipher formats surfaced in Philadelphia in 1893, Cincinnati in 1907, and London in 1912, suggesting not coincidence but coordination. The warning note used a specific phrase, the erasure. That term has no documented public use until it appears in declassified Cold War intelligence briefings from 1958, nearly 80 years after the box was sealed. Either the men who built this capsule invented a phrase that intelligence agencies would independently adopt generations later, or someone was using language that came from somewhere else entirely. The coordinated appearances across 3 countries within a 35-year window point toward a network, organized, deliberate, and apparently unanswered. Who were the 7 men in the photograph? What did they know that required copper walls, transatlantic coordination, and a language no one has cracked? The box is gone. The cipher remains unread. And somewhere, in the silence between those 2 facts, the warning is still waiting. The Doom Vault. In 1983, maintenance workers beneath a decommissioned Soviet installation near Milovic, Czechoslovakia, found a false concrete wall. Behind it, a sealed chamber with no external handle. The only way to lock it was from the inside. Someone had gone in, sealed the door behind them, and left through a passage that no longer exists, if it ever did. The Milovic base had been a Soviet forward operations installation since 1968. On the surface, it was military infrastructure, unremarkable in the context of Cold War Eastern Europe. But the chamber behind the false wall had nothing military about it. No weapons, no communications beyond a hand-crank radio transmitter, no tactical purpose. According to Czechoslovak authorities who filed an internal report that year, the room measured approximately 4 meters by 6 meters, with no ventilation, no lighting, and no sanitation. It was not built for people to live in. It was built for something to survive in. 3 metal crates inside contained vacuum-sealed glass containers holding soil samples, dried plant specimens, insect specimens, and what laboratory analysis later confirmed were bacterial cultures. None of them dangerous. All of them belonging to species not cataloged anywhere in Soviet biological records. The specimens were extinct. Someone had collected organisms that were already disappearing and sealed them away from whatever was coming. The single notebook found on the folding table was written in an unidentified personal cipher, but its cover bore a translated phrase that became impossible to forget, for the ones who come after the last summer. One page inside contained detailed instructions for rebuilding agricultural soil from scratch, written with the assumption that no living topsoil would remain on the surface. The extinct bacterial cultures are the detail that breaks the routine explanation. Cataloging organisms that were already gone at the time of deposit requires scientific resources far beyond a standard military installation. Whoever built this vault wasn't just preparing for nuclear winter. They were documenting what was already being lost, species by species, as if the erasure had already begun, and the vault was the last archive standing. Someone built a survival kit for the planet itself, and they sealed the door so no one could get in before it was needed. The buried files. 3 months after Roswell dominated American headlines in the summer of 1947, a group of men drove into the desert outside Kingman, Arizona, and buried a steel canister in the ground. A local rancher watched them do it. According to his sworn affidavit, filed 47 years later when the canister was recovered during a water pipe excavation in 1994, one of the men was wearing a uniform consistent with Army Air Force intelligence insignia. They told him they were making sure the wrong people never found the right answers. The canister contained 14 manila folders of typed documents, a roll of partially salvageable photographic film, a hand-drawn map of grid coordinates in the Nevada desert, and a wax-sealed glass vial. Spectroscopic analysis of the vial's contents identified the material as no known alloy, its composition approximately 61% aluminum, 28% unidentified element, 11% trace compounds. The photographs showed a debris field and 3 figures in hazmat suits, too degraded for definitive identification. The documents referenced a program called Project Stork. That name was the thread that changed everything. Project Stork did not appear in any declassified Air Force record until 2003, when a Freedom of Information Act release confirmed it as a real 1947 materials analysis program. The official description: non-standard material recovery. A phrase that appears nowhere else in Air Force documentation of the period. The men who buried this canister in the Arizona desert 3 months after Roswell were referencing a classified program by name before that program existed in any public record, which means they were inside it, and they had already decided the official record couldn't be trusted. The vial and its unidentified alloy sample were transferred to a private laboratory in 2001. That laboratory closed in 2003. Its records were not archived publicly. The rancher's affidavit is the only surviving testimony linking a face to what was buried. The coordinates on the map have never been officially investigated. Historical records show the canister's existence was confirmed by the recovery team in '94. But what it contained became, almost immediately, someone else's problem to manage, and no one's obligation to explain. If it was nothing, why bury it? And if it was something, what happened to the vial? The future chest. In the summer of 1939, at the New York World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, Queens, the Westinghouse Electric Corporation lowered a torpedo-shaped metal cylinder 50 feet into the ground and sealed it with a wax and asphalt compound engineered to last 5,000 years. They addressed it to the people of 6939 AD. The capsule was the most scientifically ambitious message in a bottle ever constructed. What they chose to put inside was supposed to be reassuring. The choice of what to leave out was not. The capsule was designed by consulting engineers who consulted historians, archivists, and scientists about what would survive, what would communicate, and what a civilization 5 millennia in the future might need to understand the world of 1939. They included newsreels, seeds of common food crops, a copy of Gone with the Wind, $1 worth of coins, fabric swatches, and a 10 million word microfilmed digest of human knowledge. They distributed a companion volume, the Book of Record, to 3,650 libraries, monasteries, and institutions worldwide, with instructions for how to find the capsule, because the designers privately assumed civilization might not survive intact until 6939. Albert Einstein contributed a letter. It described a world rich in inventive minds, connected by electricity and flight, and then turned dark. The production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everybody must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle. The letter closed with the hope that posterity would read it with proud superiority. A second capsule buried in the same location in 1965 added a bikini, a ballpoint pen, tranquilizer pills, and a credit card, a different civilization's answer to the same question. Westinghouse's internal memos from 1939 show engineers actively debating whether to include a warning about atomic energy. They decided against it. Too alarming for a document of hope. 6 years later, the bomb fell. The capsule was already sealed. The reference markers for its location were removed during construction work in the 1960s and have only been approximately recovered since. They built a letter of hope and then deliberately omitted the thing that made hope necessary. The future they imagined doesn't know what was left on the cutting room floor. The frozen pod. In the summer of 1930, a Soviet geological survey team working the permafrost near the Kolyma River in Siberia hit something at 11 meters depth that their instruments hadn't predicted. A metal cylinder, approximately 80 centimeters long, fused into the frozen ground. The ice layer sealing it above was independently dated to at least 2,000 years old. They had found something that someone buried before the Roman Empire existed, in one of the most remote places on Earth. The cylinder was constructed from an iron-bronze alloy using a riveting technique that Siberian metallurgical traditions of the period cannot account for. The nearest analogous construction method appears in Hellenistic metalwork from Asia Minor, approximately 5,000 kilometers away. How a container built with techniques from the Eastern Mediterranean ended up sealed in Siberian permafrost 2 millennia ago is a question the initial Soviet report, classified under NKVD directive in 1931, did not attempt to answer. Inside, preserved by the permafrost, a scroll of treated animal hide covered in a script that partially matches early Proto-Turkic runes, but contains grammatical structures linguists have not been able to assign to any known language family. 3 small clay tablets bore astronomical diagrams that, when interpreted, correspond to the precise positions of Mars and Jupiter in approximately 114 BC, a date independently verifiable against modern orbital calculations with 94% confidence, according to a reanalysis published in a Russian academic journal in 2004. Wrapped around the tablets was a piece of woven silk. Silk production was not documented in that region of Siberia until at least 1,500 years after the capsule was sealed. 47 of the script's symbols remain entirely unidentified. 30 have been matched to known rune systems. The astronomical precision is the detail that eliminates coincidence as an explanation. You cannot accidentally inscribe the correct positions of 2 planets for a specific historical date without either observing them at that exact moment or possessing mathematical models of planetary motion that mainstream history does not credit to that region or era. Who carried this across a continent and buried it in permafrost? And what were they trying to preserve that was worth that journey? The lost capsule. In 2007, workers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, finally exhumed what was supposed to be the most celebratory time capsule in American history. The Tulsa-Rama capsule, buried in 1957 alongside a brand new Plymouth Belvedere automobile, had been one of the most publicized civic spectacles of the post-war era. Half a century later, the car was destroyed, flooded by groundwater that had turned the burial chamber into a slow tomb. But beneath the ruined Plymouth, lodged in the silt, workers found something that had no business being there. A sealed steel box, approximately 30 centimeters square, bearing a single stamped date, 1916. The Tulsa-Rama burial in 1957 was a major civic event with extensive documentation. Photographs, city officials, newspaper coverage, a ceremony. No anomaly was noted. No second box was recorded, which means sometime between the initial site preparation and the final sealing, someone slipped a 41-year-old box into the ground beneath a Plymouth and walked away without being seen. Inside the 1916 box, a handwritten ledger of names and addresses, all Tulsa residents. Cross-referenced against city records, 34 of the 41 names belong to victims of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. The destruction of the Greenwood District, known as Black Wall Street, which killed an estimated 300 people and was actively suppressed from Oklahoma history textbooks until 1997. Also inside, a sealed glass bottle containing ash, a photograph of a burning building, and a single typed card reading, "Remember us. They will try to make you forget." The date stamped on the box, 1916, is 5 years before the massacre. Either it was misdated deliberately, or someone began documenting what was coming before it happened. Both explanations are more disturbing than the alternative. The ash in the bottle has never been tested. The families of massacre victims have requested its return. Someone hid the truth inside the most visible lie they could find. For 50 years, the car was the story. Underneath it, the real one was waiting. The cursed urn. Every archaeologist who entered Tutankhamun's tomb in November of 1922 had heard the stories, the inscription above the entrance, the curse. Most dismissed it publicly. But inside the innermost chamber, arranged around the sarcophagus, the 4 alabaster canopic urns held something beyond the preserved organs of a dead king. Egyptologist Herbert Winlock, director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Egyptian Expedition and one of the most respected scholars of his generation, translated a secondary inscription on the base of the innermost urn. He then spent 11 years deciding what to do with what it said. The canopic urns bore standard protective texts, the guardianship of the 4 sons of Horus, exactly what Egyptologists expected. But Winlock's private notes, held in the Metropolitan Museum archive, reference an additional inscription on the innermost urn's base that he described as an inventory of what will be taken from those who disturb the resting. This text was not included in Howard Carter's official excavation report. It was not published in any academic journal during Winlock's lifetime. In 1935, Winlock published his most famous paper, the so-called Curse of the Pharaohs. It became the definitive scholarly debunking. Of the 58 people present at the tomb's opening, only 8 died within 12 years. Statistically unremarkable for a group of that size and age range. The curse, Winlock argued, was a myth amplified by press sensationalism. His analysis was thorough, authoritative, and almost universally accepted. The man who did the most to kill the curse publicly was the same man who had privately translated something he chose not to share. In 1968, a University of Liverpool team conducted X-ray analysis of the urns. Their published report references a secondary inscription. The photographs of that specific panel were not included in the published findings. 2 separate groups of experts, 40 years apart, both encountered the same text, and both omitted it from the official record. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. What exactly did it say? And why did 2 generations of archaeologists independently decide the world wasn't ready to know? The Arctic Crate. When HMS Erebus went down somewhere in the Canadian Arctic in the winter of 1848, it took 129 men and the most exhaustively provisioned expedition in British naval history with it. Sir John Franklin's attempt to chart the Northwest Passage became the most studied naval disaster of the 19th century. When Parks Canada archaeologists finally located the wreck on the ocean floor in September of 2014, they expected to find a grave. What they found in the captain's cabin was a sealed wooden crate that appeared on no manifest ever recovered from the site. Franklin's expedition carried more documentation than almost any voyage of its era: supply lists, personal journals, official orders from the Admiralty. The absence of this crate from all known records is not an oversight. Lead-soldered wooden containers of its dimensions were associated with specimen storage, the careful preservation of materials meant to survive a long journey and still be legible on arrival. Someone packed it deliberately and made sure it wasn't logged. Divers working the site between 2014 and 2019 recovered the crate's contents: a glass jar of mercury in a quantity far exceeding navigational need, a leather-bound notebook with its first 40 pages cleanly excised before sealing, a brass instrument resembling a sextant but carrying an additional rotating arm with no known navigational function, and a folded document in Franklin's hand bearing coordinates. Those coordinates do not correspond to any location on the expedition's charted course. When plotted, they fall in the Beaufort Sea, approximately 340 kilometers north, within range of what a 1998 Canadian Geological Survey identified as an anomalous magnetic field concentration. The notebook pages were not damaged by water. The binding shows deliberate excision. Someone removed them before the crate was sealed. Franklin's final known letter to the Admiralty, written before departure, contained this line: "Should what I have been shown prove accurate, the route we seek may be of considerably less importance than what lies at its terminus." Franklin wasn't lost. He was going somewhere specific, and whatever sent him there made sure the evidence survived the ice: the stone archive. In 1902, French archaeologist Jacques de Morgan, excavating at Susa, in present-day Iran, unearthed a column of black diorite 2¼ meters tall. It was not a monument to military victory. It was a legal archive. 282 laws inscribed in cuneiform, the Code of Hammurabi, dated to approximately 1754 BC. When cuneiformist Father Jean-Vincent Schiele decoded it, legal scholars who studied his translation called its provisions functionally indistinguishable from modern tort law. A document 3,700 years old was running on the same logic as a 21st century courtroom. The stele had not been displayed in Babylon. It had been buried, upside down, in Susa, 400 kilometers from its origin. The Elamite king, Shutruk-Nahunta, carried it there after his conquest of Babylon in 1158 BC, not as a trophy for display, but inverted and interred, a deliberate act of suppression. The code was not meant to be found. The fact that it was found is an accident of archaeology, not of intent. The surface of the stele carries something else that took a century to recognize. Astronomical data embedded in the prologue and epilogue encodes the precise heliacal rising of the star Sirius, as observed from Babylon in 1792 BC, the year Hammurabi took the throne, accurate to within 2 degrees. The ancients didn't just write law, they anchored it to the sky, to a specific moment, to a cosmological claim that the king's authority was written into the movement of the stars. Father Schiele's original 1902 translation omitted or softened several provisions relating to women's property rights and medical malpractice liability. The fuller text was not published until a 1956 academic retranslation. The most important detail is what's missing. The stele has 3 sections of text that were deliberately erased and never reinscribed. Approximately 35 additional laws removed before or during burial, gone permanently. The erasure is visible. No record of those laws exists anywhere. What were the 35 missing laws? And who decided 3,200 years ago that some rules, even in a code meant to last forever, were too dangerous to survive? The Voynich vessel. In 1912, antiquarian book dealer Wilfred Voynich purchased a small manuscript from a Jesuit college in Italy. He thought he had found a medieval curiosity. What he had actually found was 240 pages of illustrated text in a language no human being has ever decoded, sealed inside a ceramic vessel whose glaze composition Voynich described in his 1921 correspondence with botanist Edith Clarke as unlike anything I have encountered in European ceramics. That vessel has never been transferred to any public collection. Its current location is unknown. The manuscript itself has been radiocarbon dated to between 1400 and 1438 AD with 95% confidence. It is currently held at Yale's Beinecke Rare Book Library as manuscript 408. Its 240 pages contain 4 distinct sections: an herbal section depicting plants that match no known species, an astronomical section with star arrangements that correspond to no cataloged constellation system, a biological section showing figures of women in interconnected pools of liquid, and a recipe section. All of it written in a script with consistent, measurable grammatical structure. Whatever this is, it is not random. Someone was writing something. We simply cannot hear it. William Friedman, the American cryptanalyst who broke Japan's purple cipher during World War II, the man considered the greatest codebreaker of the 20th century, spent years analyzing the manuscript. His conclusion, recorded in a classified 1945 memo, was that it was not a simple cipher, not a known polyalphabetic system, and possibly not a European language base at all. When the best codebreaker in American history tells the NSA he doesn't know what he's looking at, the correct response is not to file it under curiosity and move on. A 2019 computational linguistics study by Dr. Greg Kondrak at the University of Alberta used artificial intelligence analysis to suggest the manuscript's underlying language might be an encoded form of Proto-Hebrew. Peer review has not confirmed this. Nothing has ever been confirmed. The manuscript's final page contains one legible element, a partial alphabet, and a phrase in plain Latin, a line from a Roman comedic play by Terence, written approximately 160 BC. She sells her merchandise, she holds nothing back. It is the only sentence in the entire document that anyone can read, and it tells us nothing except that whoever wrote this knew exactly what they were doing. The manuscript survived 600 years in a vessel that shouldn't exist, written in a language that shouldn't work, describing a world that doesn't exist. It has been studied by cryptographers, botanists, linguists, and astronomers. It has been read by everyone. It has been understood by no one. And somewhere between those two facts is the most important thing anyone ever tried to tell us. We just don't speak the language anymore. 10 sealed containers. 10 acts of deliberate preservation. And in every single case, the people who opened them walked away with more questions than answers. That is the pattern. Not that the past hid things from us carelessly, but that it hid them on purpose. In copper and lead and ceramic and ice. In coordinates that shouldn't exist and languages that can't be decoded. And laws that were erased before the archive was buried. Every item on this list was sealed by someone who understood that the people opening it might not be ready. Some of them were right. What these capsules reveal, taken together, is not a collection of mysteries, but a single argument that human beings have always known more than they were willing to say out loud, and that the gap between what was known and what was recorded is where history actually lives. The question worth sitting with is not what they hid. It is what they believed was worth the trouble of hiding it. If this changed how you think about the past, drop a comment with the item that unsettled you most. The real conversation always happens down there. And if you want to keep going deeper, subscribe, because this is only the surface. Every sealed door is a question someone had the courage to ask, and the wisdom to leave unanswered. The ones who opened them weren't terrified by what they found. They were terrified by how long it had been waiting.